Joining us right now, Brad Thor, New York Times bestselling author. #1 New York Times best-selling author, I should say, of Hidden Order. That was his latest book, of course, just came out last year. And, Brad, you were nice enough to be in studio with us all morning long one morning, so you know what we're going through here.
Yeah, I do. It was a lot of fun. Good morning, guys.
Good morning. We look forward to having you back when your new book comes out in July, titled Act of War. But first, we want to talk to you about what's going on in Malaysia with all the speculation over this missing airliner. We thought, my gosh, this sounds like it could be right out of a novel, because so much of your plots, so many of your plots that you come up with very inventive terrorist attacks and things, they are very close to what ends up happening in our headlines. Have you been watching this? And what are your observations?
Well, what's interesting here is there's a lot more that the Malaysian government knows than they are communicating with the public. And you know, we don't want to paint a group with one brush, but the Malaysians have turned out to be either incredibly duplicitous or incredibly inept with the handling of this. You know, there's so many unanswered things, and every single day there's another story attached to this. You know, we had the 2 Iranians on the stolen passports that popped up, and that was very interesting. Now that's quieted down. There's the whole thing about, was the captain upset over an opposition leader in Malaysia being jailed on potentially trumped-up charges? He had maybe been at a rally the day the plane took off. There's so much stuff here that just does not make sense, and now apparently the police are looking into the religious backgrounds, Islam, of the pilot and co-pilot, and is that a factor here?
I mean, really, when you start to look at all of the facts that we now believe to be accurate, and boy, it's been slow coming, and you're right, the Malaysian government has been rather duplicitous and I think and inept about bringing forth this information. But it does now seem to be focused on the pilot, possibly the co-pilot, and it does center around some of the actions that took place and the timing of those actions. As you look at the facts as we know, connect the dots. What do you think happened?
Well, you've got systems that they had access to as the flight crew that were turned off. You had the ACARS system, which was a communication system. You had the transponder that identifies the flight. And you had one of the systems turned off before they signed off. The ACARS was the first thing to go off. And you still had the co-pilot when they were kind of passing to a different radar area, saying to the last group of air traffic control people he was talking to, "All right, good night." He would have at that point already known that the ACARS was turned off, and that's one of the reasons that they suspect that these guys knowingly were involved in the intentional. Let's face it at this point, everything points to the fact that this was intentional, not accidental, because there were systems that were turned off and the flight kept going. And we also know that those engines, because they have a special thing in there that pings to the Inmarsat, the British satellite system, that these engines ping to send out information. So we know that kept going. What's interesting here is, you know, a lot of people don't know that in 2003, we went bonkers in the United States because a 727 that used to belong to American Airlines that got sold to a private company went missing out of Angola, and we never found it. So these things are concerning for us, but you have to wonder, where could this thing be? There's only 600-plus runways, supposedly, in the world that are going to be big enough that this airplane could have gotten to and landed on, 5,000-plus feet. So when you look at the facts, it looks intentional, not accidental, and then you have to go one step further. If you turn off the transponder, that's because you don't want to get found, not because you want to crash it into the ocean. It's because there's an act of terrorism supposedly somewhere in there.
That's
the
interesting.
big concern.
So, Brad Thor, I mean, you write these books. You've got how many thrillers have you written now?
13. Act of War this summer will be my 14th.
All right, so 14 times now you have had to come up with some very creative and very believable plots where a terrorist does unknown, horrible things to private citizens all around the world. You look at this and you see what has happened, and you see that there is a jet missing now, a very large jet. What could be at play here using your creative mind?
Well, the problem for me is where the jet disappeared. As an American and worrying about this jet potentially being used against a target here in the United States, it would be nearly impossible to fuel this thing fully and get it here with a ton of fuel so that it could crash. So as an American, I say, is there anything you could put on board this thing? Could you turn it into a flying bomb in a way that involves something other than jet fuel? Is this thing headed for the next Super Bowl? Is it headed for the next State of the Union address? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Or is it going to be used somewhere else, potentially in Europe
Asia.
or against the Israelis? That
Or
would
in
be
the
my
Middle
concern.
East, yeah.
Well, somebody had said to me that one of the things that they feared most was that this might be retrofitted with some type of EMP device, electromagnetic pulse device. That's a very scary scenario.
Absolutely, but it's funny you should mention EMPs because I have a very, very simple EMP plot in the next book, in Act of War, this summer, and there's a lot easier ways to deliver an EMP strike against the United States than stealing a 777 and trying to get it all the way back to America from somewhere in East Asia.
All right, so Brad Thor, you're a best-selling author. You don't really have to pitch your plots anymore, but I'm guessing you do some pitching maybe to Hollywood or some studios that might want to make a movie. So you're sitting there across from the studio exec, and you say, all right, here's the premise. 777, it goes missing, ends up being hijacked by the pilot or conspirators on the plane, and they turn it into a weapon, huge shares. Would the guy sitting across the desk there from you look at you and say, oh, no one will ever believe that. That's impossible. A jet doesn't go missing. Come on.
Absolutely. And what I would have to do is I would have to say it's happened before, and I would point back to that old American Airlines plane in 2003 that went missing out of Angola after it was sold to a private company. So that would be my pitch, is to ground it in reality. But this has got people around the world very, very concerned, and it should be. I don't hold out much hope for those passengers. I think when they took it up to 45,000 feet above the service threshold of that plane at 43,000, I think they took it up there, they cut the oxygen, and just let all those people die.
So that's an important thing. You think when they went to 45,000 feet, if they decompressed the cabin, then the only people that would have oxygen would be the people in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's how you get rid of the crew. That's the other thing. We're not hearing anything about who the flight attendants were, who was the purser on that flight. You've got a pretty large, 10-plus person crew operating on that. We haven't heard any focus on those people. It's all on the pilot and co-pilot, and the way that they acted and the things that we know about that plane all suggest that this was intentional, not accidental, and only time will tell. But I wouldn't hold out much hope for getting information from the Malaysians because they know a lot more than they're telling the rest of the world.
All right. Brad Thor, New York Times best-selling author, Hidden Order, Blacklist, and his next one coming up this July, Act of War. Really appreciate you coming in and adding your expertise to what really, unfortunately, is still just a lot of speculation.
And do come when your new book comes out. We'll be happy to have you again.
I'd love to be there. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.